He wasn't chasing money, he wasn't looking for treasure, and he didn't expect to find anything of value. This road didn't appear on tourist maps, and most people drove past it without slowing down. The Nevada desert felt like a place where nothing ever happens, and where nothing ever should, but places like this sometimes hide what outlives everyone who once knew it. That day, he simply decided to stop. If he had driven another 100 meters, this story would not exist. He turned off the main highway almost without thinking. The asphalt ended quickly, replaced by dust and loose stones under the tires. Around him, scorched earth, low hills, and a silence heavier than city noise. The sun stood high, the air thick with heat, and time itself seemed frozen. He drove slowly until he noticed the remains of old structures. Warped wooden beams, rusted sheets of metal, a half-collapsed awning. It was an abandoned miners' camp from the early 1900s, one of those places where life once thrived and now not even traces remain. He stopped briefly to stretch his legs, take a few photos, and look around. Sand crunched under his boots, the wind pushed dry tufts of grass across the ground, and in that moment his eye caught a faint metallic glint near the base of the awning. Something beneath the sand reflected the sunlight. At first it looked like trash. A tin can, a scrap of metal, nothing special, but he bent down anyway. He brushed the sand aside and felt the cool weight of metal. The object was surprisingly heavy for its size. He lifted it and froze for a second. It was a lighter. Old. Unfamiliar in shape. Darkened by time, but intact, not broken, not falling apart. Just forgotten. He turned it over in his hand, unsure what to think, and slipped it into his pocket, more out of curiosity than intention. He took a few more steps, scanning the ground, when he noticed another glint, almost in the same spot, just a little farther away. Another object nearly buried in sand, a second lighter, different shape, different mechanism, but the same feeling, as if someone had once placed it there and never returned. Two objects lying in the desert for decades, outliving the people who owned them, the years, the forgetting. He still didn't know what he had found, but he already sensed it wasn't random. The desert rarely gives anything away for free. Back at his truck, he placed both lighters on the dashboard and just looked at them. In the harsh Nevada sunlight, their surfaces revealed more detail. Fine engravings, edges worn smooth not by time alone, but by hands. Countless movements, pockets, habits. These weren't souvenirs or decorative items, they were tools, personal ones. The kind a person carries every day without thinking, the kind that becomes part of routine, then disappears without ceremony. He didn't clean them, didn't polish them. Something told him not to interfere. Instead, he wrapped them carefully in a cloth and drove on. The rest of the day passed without incident, but the thought stayed with him. Who dropped them? Why two? Why here? Mining camps were temporary by nature, but people lived entire lives in them. Worked, argued, laughed, waited. These lighters had witnessed moments no photograph ever captured. That evening, in a small motel outside Tonopah, he finally allowed himself to examine them properly. Under a desk lamp, the details became clearer. One lighter carried a manufacturer's mark he didn't recognize. The other had faint initials etched near the hinge, almost erased but still there. He searched online, not expecting much. Vintage lighter, antique lighter, early 20th century metal lighter. The results surprised him. Similar models appeared on collector forums, some listed as rare, others marked museum grade. Prices varied wildly, from a few $100s to numbers that made him pause. Still, he didn't jump to conclusions. The internet exaggerates, listings don't equal sales. But curiosity had turned into something else. Attention, he dug deeper. Old patents, manufacturer histories, obscure auction archives. One of the lighters matched a design produced for less than 5 years before the company disappeared. The other came from a European maker whose items rarely crossed the Atlantic. Together, they didn't just look old, they looked misplaced. For the first time, he wondered if the desert hadn't swallowed them by accident, but preserved them. Dry air, no moisture, no corrosion beyond surface aging, conditions almost perfect for metal. He realized how unlikely this was. Two rare items surviving a century in open desert, found on the same day, a few steps apart. The odds were uncomfortable. He leaned back in the chair and laughed quietly, not from excitement, but disbelief. He still didn't know their value. He didn't know who once owned them. But he knew one thing now. These weren't objects you sell quickly. These were objects that demanded patience, and patience, as he was about to learn, was where the real story began. He didn't rush to sell them. That felt wrong. Instead, he let time stretch. The lighters stayed wrapped, moved from glove compartment to backpack, from backpack to a small wooden box at home. Days passed, then weeks. The desert encounter replayed in his head in fragments. The heat, the wind, the way the metal had caught the light. He began to understand that value wasn't only in age or rarity, but in context. And context takes work. He started reaching out quietly. Not to marketplaces, not to auction sites. He wrote messages on collector forums that felt almost apologetic. No prices, no hype, just careful descriptions and a few photographs taken in natural light. Responses came slowly, but when they came, they carried weight. One message stood out, short, precise, no emojis, no exclamation points, just questions about condition, provenance, and how exactly the lighters had been found. That conversation turned into another, then another. He learned quickly that serious collectors speak a different language. They don't ask how much, they ask how certain. Certainty required research. He spent evenings reading about defunct manufacturers, wartime production shifts, early ignition mechanisms. He compared wear patterns, screw types, metal composition. Each detail narrowed the story. One expert pointed out something he had missed: the pairing itself. Two lighters from different origins found together suggested movement, travel, possibly ownership by someone who crossed borders long before air travel made that common. That idea changed everything. These weren't just old objects, they were evidence. He requested informal appraisals, not valuations, opinions. One estimate came back conservative. Another was higher. A third simply said, if authentic, these belong in a private collection, not a shop window. That line stayed with him. Private collection meant discretion. It meant patience. It meant waiting for the right person, not the fastest buyer. By now, the lighters felt heavier, not physically, but symbolically. He was no longer just holding metal, he was holding a decision: sell quickly and move on, or protect the story and see where it led. He chose the second without fully knowing why, and somewhere between late-night research tabs and unanswered messages, he realized something quietly unsettling. The desert hadn't given him these objects by chance. It had given him responsibility. The right message arrived without warning. No bargaining, no drama. A collector based on the East Coast, known for acquiring objects with unclear but compelling histories, asked for one final verification and a call. The conversation was calm, almost clinical. He explained where the lighters would go, how they would be preserved, and why they mattered. The offer came at the end, clear, final, no room for negotiation and no need for it. After weeks of uncertainty, the number felt unreal. Not because it was extravagant, but because it was real. He agreed the same day. The package was shipped with insurance, tracking, and silence. When the money arrived, it didn't feel like a win. It felt like closure. The desert hadn't rewarded luck, and it had rewarded attention. Two forgotten objects, ignored by time, had carried value forward simply because someone noticed them. In the end, the collector paid $41,000. Not for metal, not for rarity alone, but for a story that survived long enough to be found, and that stayed with him longer than the money ever could. And do you think the guy got lucky? How much would you pay for these lighters?